Greetings and various assorted salutations. Welcome to another Ancient Civilizations lecture. Today we're looking at the Mayans. So we've gone from the old world, Africa, Europe, Asia, all that stuff, to the New World. The New World has civilizations, and by civilizations we're loosely meaning that as people who build cities. There's a lot of different groups that build cities in the New World. There's the Aztecs, the Mayans, the Toltecs, the Olmecs. There's some different groups in North America as well. There's a lot of different city building civilizations, but we're going to focus on the three big ones that a lot of people have already heard of: the Mayans, the Aztecs, and the Inca. And the reason for that is that's what we're supposed to be doing according to the assignment description. Are there other civilizations in this part of the world? Yes. There's also groups of people who don't live in cities. The Americas are heavily known for their non-city dwelling city civilizations, such as the various Native American tribes of North America. Many of them did not use cities as much because that wasn't as convenient for their lifestyle. Anyways, we're looking at the Mayans. And in case you're wondering, the pictures are from Tulum. But modern day references. So the world ended in 2012, in case you didn't get the memo. 2020 is part of the after party. Because let's see here. Okay, well, I guess that was wrong. Essentially what happened with the Mayan calendar is there was a lot of misunderstanding and Hollywood hype around it. So like popular culture really latched onto the idea of the world's coming to an end. Things like that. There's an SNL skit on it, of course. There's a video that explains how the Mayan calendar works. Essentially what happened is, long story short, essentially the Mayan calendar, there's multiple calendars, and this was the end of a particular era, and it would be the transition to the next one on the Mayan calendar. But anyways, let's get into the basics. The Mayans. Who were the Mayans? Essentially, the Mayans were groups of people, and the reason why I say groups is because we're not completely sure if they were united. We know that the Mayans had multiple cities. We know that there were city-states, but we don't know. We don't have a firm idea of the relationships between these cities. Presumably, they were independent city-states. It's not clear if they united or if they just had really good trade relations. Because we do know that the city-states were connected together through trade relations. Now, as to where, the Mayans are going to be located on the Yucatan Peninsula, which is modern-day southeastern Mexico, Guatemala, and Belize, and parts of Honduras and El Salvador as well. So right here is kind of one of the areas, the big dot here. This is the Yucatan Peninsula. This is referred to as Mesoamerica. Like Mesopotamia. Mesopotamia is seen as kind of the cradle of civilization. Many historians have referred to the Yucatan Peninsula and Central America as the cradle of life for civilization for the Americas. But here's another map that kind of gives you an idea. We're going to talk about the Aztecs in a separate lecture, but the Aztecs are more of over here, while the Mayans are going to be over here on the peninsula itself. Tulum, of course, is right here. But no, and then here's another map of it in even closer detail. So, incidentally, the Mayans are a bit younger than some of the civilizations. We know that people are starting to settle in the Yucatan Peninsula around 2000 BC. The classical period, so like the Mayans at their high point, would have been between 250 BC and 900 AD. So they had a pretty long-running classical period. We have what is referred to as the PostClassical Period, which is 950 AD, right up until 1530 AD. Essentially, the post-classical period is where there were some dramatic population drops, and some cities were even abandoned. This is where kind of the myth of the Mayans, they just disappeared. Well, what happened is their city shrunk considerably. Now, by shrunk, I mean some of their cities were still larger than cities in Europe. Many cities that the Mayans had were very complicated, well organized, and essentially what happened between the classical and post-classical is there may have been a drought, or a drought is the big running theory, and essentially some of the cities, some of the people abandoned the city lifestyle. But that's not to say they disappeared forever. Because we actually have Spanish accounts of seeing places like Tulum, and actually the Spanish conquered the Mayans completely by 1697. This 1530 deal is kind of when things really fall apart. Now, the Mayans are organized into highly complex cities. The higher ranks of society live in inner portions of cities built of stone. The poorer people lived around the city in more wood buildings. The Mayans, very complex society, highly organized. They had trade networks that connected them with all the other Mayan city-states. It's very impressive what they accomplished it. And they did this without ever inventing the wheel. They didn't have a lot of domesticated animals as well. Nothing compared to Europeans, Asians, and Africans. They did not have cattle. They did not have pigs. They did not have horses. Here's some more pictures. If you go on to the slideshow in the link below, you can get a closer look at some of the architecture and remains of the city of Tulum. It's a very impressive city. Notable accomplishments. Grand architecture. The Mayans built incredible buildings, complex cities that were laid out very well, very highly organized. Their cities, their temples could be used as observation platforms and were built to impressive scale. This is not from Tulum, this is a different site, but this is an example of an intact temple that survived the Spanish. But they were capable of building very complicated, very effective buildings. We also have astronomy as one of their notable achievements. Essentially, through astronomy, the Mayans had a very complicated mathematics system. The reason why you develop precise calendars, and this is true across most city-building civilizations, is you need to be able to know when to plant crops, when to harvest crops, and have some degree of being able to predict weather patterns and seasons. And so the Mayans had a very complex calendar to calculate when to do things, how to do things, things like that. We will look at the calendars in more detail in some of our unit activities. And also they had a very complex math system that was very developed alongside of it. As a general rule of thumb, if you have astronomy and you have calendars, you usually have a pretty good math system for civilizations. The Babylonians, the Egyptians, the Greeks, all these different civilizations developed very accurate mathematical systems, to name a few. Language. Now this is where it gets kind of fun. The Mayans, we have a written and spoken language. It's considered one of the most complex languages in the Americas because it was capable of, it used hieroglyphics and it had a phonetic aspect to it as well. And so it was very capable of, very flexible, very capable language. Unfortunately, much of it was lost. The Spanish Empire went out of its way to destroy many Mayan cultural works, such as temples, buildings, and this is problematic because often the Mayans wrote on the side of their buildings hieroglyphics with stories and information. And so a lot of information has been lost. However, in the 19th century, particularly with some nationalist movements, a lot of Mayans kind of wanted to recapture that language. And so they found people who spoke it. They figured out how to reread the language that was lost. And so while the spoken language never truly died out because there were always some communities using it, the written language was basically brought back into being in the 19th century. It's estimated that there are 6 million native speakers of the language, and that means that in some parts of the Yucatan Peninsula, Spanish is not the first language of a lot of people. There's a fair number of people where it would be better off speaking one of the dialects of Maya to get your point across. Anyways, that concludes the basics of the Mayan civilization. What we're going to look at in more detail is their astronomy and mathematics, and a little bit about their culture. So I guess with all that being said, until later.